And our last talk is by Johann Benedict Cristobal from Nebraska-Lincoln. And he's going to tell us about success, struggles, surprise, and short-term goals, reflections from mathematics graduate student teaching.
Okay, so welcome. Thank you again for having me here. It is not a math talk. It is actually a math education talk. So I'm going to try and be as friendly as possible with that. I am going to go back. I'm going to talk a bit about math at the end. But for now, I'm going to sort of talk us through a bit of what it's like to do math ed research. I didn't start off doing math ed research. I actually started it 3 years into my PhD. Just because I found a really enticing question, and I was like, I'd rather do that than do the PDE stuff that I thought I was going to be doing. So I want to talk you through how I do math ed research as an unorthodox explanation of how to do that. Then I want to talk about one key product that I have from this dissertation work. And then lastly, I want to have some time to sort of reflect on my doctoral experience, because this is Math Alliance. And I want to sort of connect my research with my experience in Math Alliance. So, step one. You ask yourself, what about math education intrigues you? Is there a problem out there that you want to fix or get some solutions for? So for example, I asked my colleague here, what's a question that would be enticing for you to like find out about? So for example, in teaching mathematics, to what extent is the lesson you've planned or taught actually learned by the students? So if you taught like the limit definition of the derivative, how much of that is actually being absorbed by your students? That's an interesting question. That's not an easy question to answer because people have different sort of interpretations for what it means to learn, but it's an interesting enough question. So for my dissertation though, I wanted to know why instructors taught the way that they do. Mostly because of an ego that I have of like, why do I teach the way that I do? I've had like at least 50 math teachers. How did I consolidate that into my teaching practice? And why is this important for us to ask? Well, there's a lot of us that are teaching students. Math is a sort of gateway into college education. And so it's important for us to sort of know these things. Like, why do we teach this way? And maybe we can sort of change the way that we teach and do it better and do it like more equitably if we know why we teach this way. Step two, you pick a framework. So we take our question, we take our problem, and we find a way to understand it, as opposed to trying to tackle it in every single way. Like these are broad questions. It's very hard to answer them in every single possible like sort of scenario, configuration. And so you wanna tackle it in a certain way. And me and my advisor have talked about how this actually parallels what the stuff that I used to do in math, like in math and PDEs. You could either answer a PDE on like R3, on the real numbers space 3, or you could do it on a torus. So there's already that sort of idea of you make a choice because you want to answer a certain question in a specific scenario, as opposed to trying to answer it in every sort of case study out there. So for my dissertation, I wanted to know why we teach the way that we do. And so I focused on graduate student instructors, mainly because it's their first time sort of teaching. And so it's a point where we start enacting teaching practices. We start developing what it means for us to teach and what this looks like for us. And also for this talk, I just want to focus on one aspect of it, just their written reflections. What stood out to them enough that they wanted to write about it when I asked them to write about it. And I think this is a much more focused sort of view, as opposed to trying to tackle all types of topological spaces out there. I'm just going to focus on this part. Step 3 is to design the study. This is a very loaded slide. If my advisor was here, she'd be very mad at me for simplifying this. Designing the study in math ed is very broad. You have many choices. But I'm just going to sort of summarize it into how are you going to collect the data and how are you going to analyze it. And so I made the connection to this. If you do like numerical experimentations, you have to decide, are you going to use Python? Are you going to use MATLAB? Are you going to use X, Y, and Z? What algorithms are you going to use and all that stuff? And so for my dissertation, I gave 3 people reflective prompts each week of the semester to write just about their teaching. And then I used a lot of multiple rounds. I just kept reading it over and over, like what stood out to me today as opposed to yesterday, and kept developing these sort of connections between the ideas that I was reading week to week. And so the last one is to from the data and the results that I have is you make conclusions, you make implications. We saw that with all the other talks that we have today. People made lemmas, people made propositions, people made theorems, but that's not where the journey ends. There was always a next step. We always ask another question. We always see what does this implicate. The magic squares talk was really interesting because it was just like question after question that he kept asking of like, how can we do this better? What more can we ask about this? And so that's where I sort of see that connection. And so for my dissertation, the main result that I want to talk about today is this 4 S's that I have. And I think it's a really good structure for sort of reflective writing, not just for an instructor, but also as a researcher, and even as a graduate student, which I'll connect to later. And so the one key product that I want to talk to you about is the 4 S's: success, struggle, surprise, and short-term goals. I see it as a reflective tool, not in the sense of it's a hammer, but it's a sense of it's helpful for us to sort of think about. And so I want to go back a bit and actually talk to you about the study that I did. So one semester, fall 2023, at some large university somewhere in the middle of the United States. I wonder where that is. 3 mathematics graduate students, instructors teaching for the first time. Each one taught intermediate algebra, college algebra, or math for liberal arts. And to reiterate, I was concerned about things about their experience of teaching that stood out to them in their written reflections, and how does that illuminate why we teach the certain things, why we teach the way that we do. Okay, so I want to give a sort of rationale for why did I come up with these 4 S's as a researcher. I think reading about success can point to experiences that build more confidence in teaching. If we know what is successful in the classroom, we can motivate more instructors, new instructors, to do so, to pay attention to those actions and feel proud of themselves. Because one of the things that sort of plagues new instructors, speaking from personal experiences and also from my participants, is we get bogged down by the things that we're doing wrong, that we're forgetting the stuff that we're actually doing fine or even like really good. Struggles point to aspects as a researcher for what professional development can we even do so that these experiences can get better, right? Surprises, I think it was just really fun to know what was shocking to a new instructor of like, what did you expect teaching was gonna be like and what actually happened in reality. And then short-term goals, and I'll connect this back later. This points out to what do we value as instructors? What do we wanna put in effort? What kind of jobs do we have to do in order to do better as instructors? But this is also good for the instructors. In my dissertation, I wanted the work to also be useful for them as it is useful for my research. Writing about success lets you think about teaching events that you can take confidence in. Writing about struggles means that you don't keep it inside. You actually, have a vent session on written form. Surprises lets you take note of what expectations did you have versus what is reality. And short-term goals lets you be, what is it called? Like there's a sort of check that you're actually trying to improve every single week. Accountability, the word's right there. It's an accountability system. It's written, you can teach yourself, you can see how you're improving. And those are the 4 S's. So I want to give you an example of sort of how I analyze a certain reflective prompt. So this is from Andy, one of my participants who taught college algebra. So this is just the reflection. So I'm not going to have you read all of it, but I did highlight some of the things. The thing in red spoke to the success that they had and the things that they're sort of gravitating to. So for this specific prompt, or for this specific response, what I noticed is engagement and going to office hours was good signs for them. When they knew that they were teaching well, Andy knew that they were teaching well when students came to office hours and were engaged during those hours and got something out of it. They gravitated to that sort of idea. Something they sort of struggled with, or something that they sort of saw that they struggled with, is people tend to conflate different ideas and they didn't know how to really detach those things that conflate. So for example, linear and exponential forms, y equals mx plus b versus e to the t. A lot of students kept confusing slope versus exponent or growth factor. And so she didn't really know how to decouple that from students' conflation. And then there's these words of I want and I want. And so this is sort of the stuff that I read about. I see like these are the patterns. And I didn't just, so like zooming out a bit, this is just one aspect. This is one written reflection. I was observing them, I was interviewing them. There was more stuff out there that I can connect these things to. But zooming into sort of these 4 S's, this already gives me a lot of that information. Okay, so I just want to run through really fast the themes that I saw across the 3 graduate student instructors. Successes, they really like seeing students learn. They really like seeing students engage. And that gave them sort of like a happy feeling of like, I'm doing really well because my students are interacting with each other. They like getting external validation from other instructors, from other students, from their like peer mentors, their conveners, and they really like seeing that they manage their time really well. They're like, oh, I got through content today, or I didn't get through content today, which ties into their struggle. A lot of them still had to figure out how much should I balance teaching versus not teaching? How much should I balance group work versus solo work and all that? And then for uninterested students, I didn't put the quote here, but some of them said, I want my students to think I'm less boring, because a lot of the students were uninterested, and it's like a reality of teaching. But more sort of important, alarming, is feelings of inadequacy. There was like a lot of instances where graduate students, instructors were just feeling like they're not doing the correct thing, and they don't know how to sort of like push through that. Okay, surprises. There's a lot of it here. Oh, here it is, be less boring, short-term goals. They want to encourage students' participation and collaboration and keep them engaged, and also be more useful for student learning. I'm going to skip through the surprises. It's sort of just, well, the second one is also kind of interesting, but then I read a paper that is actually just true. Students just like to be lectured at as opposed to doing group work because they think being lectured is better than group work, even though studies have shown it's the opposite. But yeah, limitation, because I have to tell you, I don't have all the answers. This was just 3 people. And people tend to write stuff differently when they know that somebody else is going to be reading it. They're not going to share their like worst nightmare or like their biggest goals because they want to be a bit humble. And so it changes. And so I want to get into sort of some of the conclusions because we have to draw conclusions. So they want to do a good job, which means that they want to see students learning. They want to see students engaging in the material. But it could also mean that they're pacing the lecture well, right? So these are good things for us to note, for us to take to the department and say, these are how graduate students think it means to do a good job in the classroom. Does this align with what you think they should be looking at? And then lastly, just to sort of fortify the reason why I like doing the reflections, having 3 graduate students reflect on a weekly basis allowed them to see sort of their progress. In particular, I like this sort of quote. Looking back, I saw a goal to make students talk to each other that I didn't follow up on, and I think it would help if I encouraged it more. So it's sort of like that accountability that I was talking about. They said that they wanted students to talk to each other, but they forgot to follow up on it, but because they were forced to read it again, they're now trying to do it more. Okay, how am I on time? We're good on time? Okay, so now I want to connect it back to the doctoral experience. Yesterday, I actually went to a really good session from the Indigenous Voices in Mathematics, and it sort of inspired me to rework this whole presentation. That's why I was kind of rushing through the first bit. It was actually just going to be that. But I wanted to add this bit because the speaker, who I'm forgetting the name of, asked us to think about and reflect on the people and non-people who have helped us get where we're at. And when I think about sort of my doctoral process, I can trace the Math Alliance and also this random person in the picture as the inspiration for goal setting, because when I think about UCLA and how I was an undergrad, I would always be a reflective person. I would think about what went well, what went bad, and what plans did not go well or got sundered. But then I never really thought about setting goals for myself. Like that was not part of my 4 S's back then. But then when I think about sort of doctoral experiences in the Math Alliance, I can see it sort of being the starting point of when I started setting goals and trying to reach for them. Because I never really thought I was going to go to grad school or even get a doctoral degree in mathematics. But here I am, like, gonna get that in like a few months. I'm gonna get it in a few months. Not to jinx myself, but I am gonna get it in a few months. So I think it was very important that I draw sort of and think the Math Alliance, because I think had I not been in the Math Alliance, one, I would not be in grad school, but maybe if I did end up in grad school, it would just say the 3 S's. It would be success, struggles, and surprises. It would not have anything about setting goals. It would not have anything about short-term goals. And so the last thing I want to talk about, since we are looking ahead and I am the final final speaker for today, so I think it's very poetic. I'm 3 months away from defending my dissertation, and I'm 4 months away from getting the doctoral degree that the Math Alliance pushes us to get and helps us get. This is one of the biggest successes that I've ever gonna probably achieve. And it's not a short-term goal, but it is short-term in the grand scheme of things. There were definitely a lot of struggles, right? And I've pushed through a lot of them with a lot of help. And the amount of successes that I've had outnumbered the amount of struggles. And the biggest surprise of it all is that I got really invested in doing math education research, because I walked into grad school being like, I want to study PDEs and fluid dynamics. And then 3 years in, I was like, wait, I really want to answer that math ed question first before I go back to that. So I think just like before, like me not knowing what grad school was, I'm at this sort of point in my career where I'm realizing that since I switched over to math ed, I'm not stuck in math ed. I can go back and do PDE work, especially because of a summer experience that I had leading an REU. I can do PDE stuff, I can do applied math, especially at the undergrad, like mentoring level. And so I'm setting a sort of new goal for myself to become a professor who primarily works with undergrads. And so I'm actually aiming to get somewhere so I can be a Math Alliance mentor and do the same thing that other people are doing. And so I think that's a good way to sort of end this session, because I think it's just time is a circle. And I am now back, I'm at that point where I get to be a mentor now. Thank you.